the second cause of failure in mental prayer is a lack of sincere devotion and of strong resolution. We are not speaking here of aridity, which is lack of what we call consolation in prayer, that is, comforting emotional feelings. We're talking about lukewarmness of the will and sloth, spiritual sloth. So, as I said yesterday, prayer requires work. See, it's if you say to your, let's say your bodily and mental inclinations, would you rather, sit and watch a movie and have a snack or meditate? Your body is going to say, oh, let's sit and have a movie. And you say, that's our nature. It takes work. It takes effort, where your brain shuts down for the movie and your body shuts down to sit in a chair. See, so so laziness is going to say, well, don't do it. See. So there requires a certain work, a certain labor and discipline to maintain the remote preparation for prayer. All the things that I said that were remote preparations, your whole spiritual life really, and other things like spiritual reading. So that requires work and attention. Also, the testimony of a good conscience, keeping your conscience clean, obedience to the commandments, purity of heart. These are all remote preparations for meditation. Silence. See, that's why you have a rule of silence in the seminary, for that precise purpose. Recollection. Again, silence is necessary for recollection. In the modernist seminaries, you go around visiting everyone else's rooms. You gather in rooms. You have like a little party in the room. It's like a dorm. So, none of that here. Spiritual reading, as we said. It is difficult to keep our minds on God and to repel distractions if we don't do these things, if we don't have that big remote preparation. It is difficult to keep up the exercises of the spiritual life amid aridity. Aridity is what happens when you enter into the second stage of the spiritual life, and all of the attractions of prayer that you originally had disappear. So it becomes pure work. See, when you're just starting out in the spiritual life, and in many cases this would be in your childhood if you're raised Catholic, there's a lot of joy in doing spiritual things, a lot of personal interest, and it makes you feel good. It's rewarding, and that all goes away. Saint Teresa said at that point, we have to learn to love the God of the consolations and not the consolations of God. See, so those things are given to you early on in the spiritual life as a way of drawing you in, as a way of introducing you. It's something similar to the way young people fall in love. Oh, we're on cloud 9 and we just love each other, and we can't live without each other. And, 1 year later, it's a little different. But people wouldn't get married unless they had that emotional high of being interested in each other and all of that. They wouldn't get married. If marriage were a purely rational thing, I think relatively few people would actually get married. Totally rational. Like buying a car or a house or a horse. So, but that doesn't mean that their love for each other goes away. It just means that all the emotion, or much of the emotion, disappears. Emotion is a cheap, passing thing. Love is to will good to someone else. All right, so spouses will learn actually to love each other more in the true sense of the word as they go along in marriage, but the emotion is going to die down. It's like anything new in life. New car, new computer. There's a certain excitement. And then it goes away. Emotions really never endure. They are there for a purpose. Even legitimate emotions of anger or of sadness, any emotion legitimately used is by its very nature transient. And it's meant to stir up things for one reason or another, but they accompany the will, and they are meant to fire up the will. But they're transient. You see, so the same thing is true in the spiritual life. There's a transient emotion, you might say, in the early stages. And that's known as aridity. It is difficult to completely submit our wills to God's will. It's not an easy thing. Especially when He wants us to do something difficult. It's fairly easy when you perceive that it's God's will that you have a piece of cake. Providence has put this in front of me. See, so, but when but it involves difficulty. For example, pursuing a vocation to the priesthood involves a lot of difficulty. It's a long road. It's not an easy road. A lot of studies, a lot of examinations, but and also your priestly life is not necessarily easy. I mean, it is easy in various aspects, but it is not easy in itself. So you don't have problems and cares of family life. That it's easy, but it's you have a lot of other things, and you don't have things that most people desire. So. That's when discerning the will of God is very, very important. And it's difficult to submit to our wills to God's will at times. So we should strive to remove the causes of distraction. This involves the discipline of our memory and intellect, to make sure that there are no disordered affections for worldly things. A general principle is that you pay attention to that which you love. So the attention of the mind is directed by the will, what the will loves. Getting back to the example of the two young people in love, all they can, their attention is completely absorbed by each other for a while, all right? So, it's the will directs the mind in that sense. It directs the activity of the mind. All right. But as time goes on, when that emotion disappears, you know, sometimes the man becomes more interested in his work than he does with the wife, which, is a common complaint, that he's married to his work. See? Because we're fickle human beings. We like this today, then we like that tomorrow, and many times, see, that emotional love, whether it's in the spiritual life or even in marriage or whatever, in courtship, is really a self-love. So you love that feeling that, oh, it feels so good. You see, it's so nice. Everything's wonderful and nice. It's really a self-love. And the danger is that if you love yourself too much, you will quit when that quits. And that's what happens in divorce. That, another lady comes along that's nicer, well, then, because it's all based on self-love. What is constant is the self-love. And the objects of the self-love differ. Or it could differ in the sense that and it could be anything, not only human beings, but jobs, cars, guns, anything that you're collecting or anything like that. And because each thing only has a limited ability to please you, including a human being, a very good human being, has a limited ability to please you, the excitement about it wears out. What does not wear out is your self-love. So you need to constantly pick out these things that feed your self-love. Okay, so that's the danger. If marriage does not graduate into a higher love, it will break up. See? And the same thing is true of prayer. If it does not graduate into a higher form, it will break up. If you do not abandon that self-love, you will stop functioning. So we must lay aside preoccupations of the day regarding our duties. And that's very hard sometimes, because many times you're worried about that. You see, that's fear. Worry is fear. Fear is a very strong emotion. What are we going to do? How am I going to get all these things done today, and so forth? It's very hard. It's a strong thing that's banging on the door of your intellect. So as much as you can, you have to do that. Don't forget, in the spiritual life, you get A for effort. In other words, that the product is not really as important as the effort. You're saying, I wish that were true for examinations. All right. So here are some recommendations for combating distractions. First is acts of humility. For humility is the remedy for all of our problems. It's the soil of virtue. The very word humility comes from the Latin word meaning soil, dirt. So if something isn't growing well, what do? You fertilize, you somehow increase the quality of the dirt. And then in almost all cases that will fix it. You water it, you aerate it, you put fertilizer. Soil is the most important aspect of farming. I think this hilltop has a curse on it. Everything dies on this hilltop. Whatever, I think they stripped all the land off, and but I can't get anything to grow. Those plants in the front of the, I think it's at least the second row of plants that died. Just died. And they even have irrigation hoses under them. They just die. So anyway, humility is the remedy for all of our problems. Second, to bring back to mind the subject of our prayer, even if you should do it 1,000 times. So even if your whole prayer is a fight against distraction, that is a great prayer. The authors say that. If it's one huge fight against distraction, you're praying well. Because just as sin is in the will, prayer is also in the will. It's not primarily in the intellect or the imagination. It's in the will. Three, to not examine too minutely the source of distraction, because this becomes a new distraction. Why am I distracted? So we should think about this at another time. All right, the next topic is illusions in mental prayer. It is an illusion to think that you can be a man of prayer even though you have a lax conscience or a dissipated mind or a heart full of attachments, or a will which is enslaved to self. See, so you're not going to pray if you've got those problems. It is an illusion to think that you can pass from absorption in active duties instantly into mental prayer. One needs some time to detach oneself from worldly considerations in order to pass into mental prayer. It is an illusion, especially for the beginner, not to choose his subject of meditation. It is an illusion to think that we can enter immediately into the body of our prayer without preparatory acts of placing ourselves in the presence of God. But this would not be true of those who live in the constant presence of God, that is, the perfect. It is an illusion to quit too easily the subject which we have prepared. It is an illusion to abandon our method too soon or to be a slave to it. Method is not prayer, but a mere instrument by which to pray. So you can be slavish to it. You can, if you want to look up the methods, look in Tanqueray. He's got them all spelled out. The Spiritual Life by Tanqueray. Very common. There's a lot of them in the library. For beginners, method is practically necessary. It should be there when necessary, but should be set aside when it becomes burdensome or an obstacle. So most authors will say that. It is an illusion to give too much time to considerations. Prayer is not a theological speculation. Rather, affections, that is, loving God, petitions, important, and resolutions are more important than theological speculations. So these acts of the will, affections, petitions, and resolutions, those are acts of the will. They are more important than theological speculations. Now, it should not be detached from the mysteries. I mean, there's obviously a theological mystery that you're considering. It could be something in our Lord's life or anything like that. But it's not an exercise in thinking about theology, primarily. So on the other hand, it is an illusion to give too little time to considerations. Piety must be based on dogma, very important. It is not merely a series of affections which are detached from the truths of the faith. I call that salvation by piety alone. Taking off from Luther's salvation by faith alone. There's some people that believe in salvation by piety alone. That it doesn't matter what you believe, and all of these controversies, theological controversies, really not important. It's just say your rosary and don't worry. That's not Catholicism. It's not, and some people will also try to get to heaven by piety alone, even though they have all kinds of sins and are habits of sin which are abominable, but they're very pious. Like Henry VIII, for one. Chopping off people's heads and burning people and whatnot. Prayer book. They try to buy their way into heaven with piety. So it's something to watch in people's spiritual lives. But you see that among certain traditional people, that they don't see the theological problems as important. The only thing that's important is that you pray and you do pious things. That's the only thing that's important. The rest of it is really, just a sideshow, we might say. And that's very dangerous, because there are some very important things to understand about the present problem.